Hello guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration file in this particular video. All the previous videos that we've actually taken a look at so far in this base configuration series of videos, we've not saved the configuration file. So everything that we've done is still in your RAM, your running config. The RAM contains the configuration file, which is referred to as the running config. But because it's inside RAM and only in RAM, if I lose my configuration, if I lose my router, all the configurations that I've done, which include the banner, the IP address, the host name, the domain name, all of them would be lost. And this is very simple right now. I haven't done too much in terms of the configuration, but even that would have been lost. So if you want this configuration to be there, just in case the router reboots or loses power, you need to save this file. And as we discussed in one of the previous videos, that if you want this file to be there, you need to save it. The save will be done in a location of your router known as the NVRAM. And the file on NVRAM that is used or checked when the router reboots is called the startup-config file. It's a special file in a special place. It's not on flash, it's on this place known as NVRAM. So in this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at how to work with this running config and the startup config, and then also how to view the contents of the config files. So again, what are the different things? Actually, I need to change this. What are we taking a look at over here? We'll take a look at configuration files. We'll take a look at how to save the running config, which will be to the startup config, and some verification commands relating to the config file. All right, so three things that we'll be taking a look at in this video. Configuration files, what are the different ones, how they work, what is a sequence of events in terms of the configuration file. We'll take a look at your how do I save the running config file, and also some verification commands. Again, build up on the same lab. The topology is the same. I'm working on the same routers, just building up on those routers. So let's take a look at the configuration files. As I told you, when you get a blank factory default router, it does have certain things inside your config file, which is the default config file. Very little stuff, things like the, the host name of the router, which is router. It has configuration, like all the interfaces that it has on that particular router are shut down by default. So if I had interface E0/0 or all the other interfaces that I have, they would have been shut down by default. So this is a config file that accompanies the iOS. So if it does not find a startup config when the iOS loads up, it does not find a startup config file, it loads up this default or factory default config file. This you cannot modify. This is something that Cisco creates by default. So initially the file contains the factory default commands. This file is located in RAM. Now, not by default. The file is actually inside your flash, but if it does not find it, it will load the file from this factory default into your RAM. And this file in RAM is called the running config. Okay, as you make changes to it, like I have been doing, making changes and configuring stuff on it, I'm just adding changes to the running config, not to the default. Default is right there as it was on flash on your iOS. I'm just making changes to the running config in memory. Now, if I don't save it, I will lose everything. That's what this is saying. If you want these changes to be there the next time around, what do I need to do? I need to save it to where? What location do I save it? I save it to NVRAM, and the name of the file is startup-config, specific name. All right, let's go ahead and do it. Right now I don't have it, but now I want to save it, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So let's go to router 1 first. I made that mistake again. The domain lookup, it's thinking that EM is some type of host name that I'm trying to reach. It will time out. Domain server is your DNS server, by the way. Okay, EN. Now, if I type in show run, okay, run, which is short for running config. I can tab it, it'll show you the full name. It is the file in memory. Let me go ahead and press enter over here. All these commands that you see over here, I didn't type them in. They came in from the default config that accompanies the iOS, including all the interfaces and their statuses all shut down except for the IP addresses that I've set up on E00. So my commands and the default commands are all in the running config, including my banners. Now, if I look at my startup config, the command for that is show startup config. Say startup config is not present. What does that tell you? I haven't saved my config. All right. So if I want to save my config, the command for that is copy running config space startup config. Copy the running config to the startup config. Destination file name, I'll say startup config. It knows automatically that this file goes into NVRAM. And this is the file name that will be checked when the router reloads. It'll say, oh, there's a startup config file. I'll load all these configurations in. So my IP addresses will be preserved. All my banners will be preserved. My host name will be preserved. All of those will be pulled from the startup config file name. So if I do a show start now, it has all the changes. So it's like saving your Word document onto your hard drive. Now, if I keep on making changes, any change that I make is still done onto the running config. It is not written to your hard drive or into your startup config. So every time I make a change, once I'm done and I'm satisfied with the change, go ahead and save the change to your config file. Again, what's the command for that? Copy run or copy running config to startup config. There's an older command that accomplishes the same thing, a shorter command. It's called write. And if you want to abbreviate it even further, WR is good enough. Write does exactly the same thing as copy running space startup config. They had put a message out saying, hey, don't use the write command because it's going to be deprecated. Again, they have not done it for the last 15-20 years. I don't expect them to do it. So personally, I use the write command to save my config rather than using the long, clunky copy running config to startup config command. But both work. In some of the newer devices, not necessarily on the routers, there's a special type of switch you might take a look at later on in your data center classes, which is called the Nexus switch. This one does not have write. It copy run start works all across the board, but on all your iOS routers, WR is still good enough. All right. So let's take a look at the lab and what we're doing in the lab. So this part we had already done. Saving the config file on both the routers. I've done it on one. Let's do it on the other one as well. Again, saving the file is something that you do in the privilege exec mode. So I do it from here, copy run start, or what's the other alternative to it? WR. Building the configuration tells me it is saving it. Okay. So it automatically knows when you do a WR, it's going to be saving it to startup config. So that's what we've done over here. Did I mention WR? Okay, right over here when I'm doing common configuration commands, I think I've done most of it. Copy run start or WR saves it. Show run and show start display the contents. Now erase startup config. Let's say I want to blank a router out. I have done configurations on a router. I want to ship this router somewhere else. So before shipping it out, I want to clean my configuration out. So one of the things that I can do is erase my startup config. If I don't want my startup config to be there, I want to blank it out. Erase startup config is a command that allows you the ability to erase the startup config. Let's go ahead and do that just for the heck of it, and I'll save it again. Erase startup config, enter. It will erase it. It says erase of NVRAM complete. Reload the router, it'll be a blank router again because I've erased the content. I want to save these configs, so WR again to save it. All right. Now, if I want to restart the router, the command is reload. Reload restarts the router. I've saved the config, so if I reload it right now, it does give you a confirmation saying reload. Once it goes through the reload, it will bring it back up, and I would still have my configuration files there. So all my configs will be preserved. So if you take a look, my router is still called router 2. If I check my IP address configuration, it's still there. Can I still ping? I'm on 2, I should be able to ping 1. Success. So all of those things were preserved. So again, can I check my configs? Absolutely. Now, one more thing I want to show you guys over here before we end the video is, remember I told you not all verification commands are available to you in your privilege in your use exec mode, and I just showed you a list. One of those commands is a show run command or show running config command. If I do show run over here, it says invalid command because show run, the running config, cannot be displayed in your use exec mode. If you go into your enable config mode, here you can do show run and you will see the running config over here. So if you want to see the contents of your running config, that's how you see it. If you want to see the contents of your startup config, show start, shows you the startup config. If they're synced up, that means all your configuration changes are saved. All right. So very important one. Whatever you do on a regular basis, whatever configurations that you done on your router and you're satisfied with it, I would recommend save the config changes. All right. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Very important video over here. Save your changes, and we'll see you in the next video now.